They say beauty is a blessing, a gift from the gods. But for Inim, it seemed more like a curse. Every man who fell in love with her, who dared to dream of making her his wife, vanished into thin air. Was it a cruel twist of fate? A vengeful spirit exacting some unknown revenge? Or something far more terrifying, lurking in the shadows beyond human understanding? In a village called Aku, there lived a young woman named Inim. She was the kind of beauty that made men forget their own names. Her skin was as smooth as freshly pounded yam, her eyes sparkled like sunlight on a river at dawn, and her smile could melt even the hardest of hearts. Men longed for her, women envied her, and elders whispered that the gods had poured all their blessings into her. But beauty alone was not enough to secure a good suitor. Inim had everything: grace, good character, and the favor of her ancestors. Yet, despite all this, something strange kept happening. Whenever a man stepped forward to claim her hand in marriage, misfortune followed. At first, the villagers dismissed it as coincidence, but as the pattern continued, whispers grew louder. The first man, Emeka, was a prosperous palm oil trader. He had already paid half of Inim's bride price when, one evening, he collapsed in his home. A healer was summoned, but Emeka spoke only of an unbearable weakness, as though something unseen was draining the life from his body. The healer gave him herbs and told him to rest. But by the next market day, Emeka was gone, vanished. His brother, the last to see him, swore he had merely been sleeping when he left his side. The villagers searched everywhere, the house, the streets, even the thick forests beyond Aku, but there was no trace of him. Then came Ifani, a well-respected young farmer who had long admired Inim. With Emeka gone, he approached her, and she accepted his proposal. Ifani's family was overjoyed, certain that he had found the perfect bride. Preparations for the wedding began, and everything seemed fine, until 3 days after their engagement. It started as a simple headache. By sunset, Ifani could barely stand without feeling dizzy. Concerned, his father told him to rest, but Ifani insisted on taking a short walk to clear his mind. His father watched him disappear down the village path, never suspecting it would be the last time he saw his son. Ifani never returned. He, too, was gone without a trace. His family, desperate and grief-stricken, gathered the village youth and scoured the land, calling his name. But Ifani had vanished as though the earth itself had swallowed him whole. By the time a third suitor disappeared, the village could no longer call it mere coincidence. Chaik, the bravest hunter in Aku, had laughed when warned of the fates of Inim's previous betrothed. He was fearless, a man who had faced wild animals in the depths of the forest. "What could possibly happen to me?" he boasted, pounding his chest. His parents pleaded with him to reconsider, his mother even weeping, fearing she would lose her son. But Chaik would not be swayed. The wedding date was set. 3 nights before the ceremony, a scream tore through the silence of his family's home. Chaik bolted upright in his bed, drenched in sweat, his breath coming in ragged gasps. His family rushed to his side as he spoke, voice trembling. "I saw something. A dark place filled with whispering voices. They were calling my name, warning me not to marry Inim." His hands shook. "They said she is not what she seems." His parents comforted him, promising to visit the village diviner at dawn. Slowly, Chaik calmed and drifted back into uneasy sleep. But when morning came, his bed was empty. He was gone. No one had seen him leave. The village erupted into chaos. 3 men, 3 disappearances. The elders called for an emergency gathering, and Inim and her parents were summoned. They questioned her, but she claimed to know nothing. Her eyes brimmed with tears, yet she had no answers. The villagers murmured amongst themselves. Some whispered that she was cursed. Others believed she was protected by a jealous spirit who would not let her marry. Some even suggested she had a spirit husband. But one thing was clear: no man who loved her was safe. Among the villagers was Obiora, Chaik's best friend. Unlike the others, he did not give in to fear or superstition. He was not the strongest or the richest, but he was wise. He watched, listened, and asked the questions no one else dared to ask. That evening, he visited Inim's home. She was sitting outside, weaving a basket. Her fingers moved deftly, but there was a shadow in her eyes. When she saw him, she smiled faintly. "Obiora, what brings you here?" Her voice was as soft as the evening breeze. He sat beside her. "I want to know the truth, Inim." Her fingers faltered slightly, but she continued weaving. "The truth about what?" "About why every man who wants to marry you disappears." His voice was steady, his gaze unwavering. "Do you not wonder about it? Do you not care?" Her hands trembled. "I care, Obiora. But what can I do? I am just a woman." He studied her closely. There was sorrow in her face, but beneath it, something else. Fear. That night, Obiora sought out the oldest woman in the village, Mama Adia. She had lived through more seasons than anyone else and knew all the village's hidden secrets. "Tell me what you know about Inim," he pleaded as he sat on the floor of her hut. Mama Adia sighed heavily, her old eyes filled with memories. "I warned them," she muttered. "Years ago, I warned them, but no one listens to an old woman." "Warned them about what?" Obiora pressed. She looked at him, her voice a whisper. "Inim is not like the other girls. She was not born in this village." Obiora's heart pounded. "Then where did she come from?" Mama Adia's gaze grew distant, as if recalling something buried deep in time. "She was found," she said, "in the Forbidden Grove." A chill ran down Obiora's spine. Everyone in Aku knew about the Forbidden Grove. No one entered. The spirits dwelled there. Any child born of that land was not of this world. Now, the pieces began to fall into place. The disappearances, the whispers in the night, the men who loved Inim, and the terrible fate that awaited them all. 4 years, the couple had prayed for a child, their hearts aching for the laughter of a little one to fill their empty home. Then, one fateful evening, while wandering near the edge of the Forbidden Grove, they saw her, a tiny baby girl, swaddled in a cloth, lying peacefully beneath an ancient tree. The air around her was eerily still, as though the very forest held its breath. But to the couple, she was nothing less than a miracle, a gift from the gods in answer to their countless prayers. Without hesitation, they scooped her into their arms and carried her home, never once questioning where she had come from or what unseen forces had placed her there. They named her Inim and raised her as their own, showering her with love, never realizing that the spirits do not give gifts freely. Obiora felt the hairs on his arms rise as the old woman, Mama Adia, spoke in hushed tones. "Everything has a price," she said. He swallowed hard, his voice barely above a whisper. "What price?" Mama Adia shook her head. "I do not know. But I do know this. Every man who tries to claim her hand disappears, as if something is watching over her, protecting her, refusing to let her belong to anyone." A heavy silence settled between them. Obiora's heart pounded. He now understood that Inim's beauty was not simply a blessing, it was a trap. But who, or what, had set it? Determined to uncover the truth, he knew he had to seek answers beyond the knowledge of mortals. If the village elders could not help, perhaps the spirits themselves would. Under the cloak of night, he made his way to the ancient shrine of Izia, a powerful priestess who had long passed away, but whose name was still spoken with reverence and fear. The shrine stood at the edge of the village, nestled between twisted roots and thick, shadowy trees. Obiora moved cautiously, glancing over his shoulder to ensure no one had seen him. He knelt before the shrine, placed an offering of palm wine and kola nuts, and whispered his plea. Then he waited. At first, there was only silence. Then, without warning, a fierce wind tore through the trees, howling like a chorus of unseen voices. The air grew heavy, thick with a presence that sent chills down his spine. Obiora pressed himself against the earth, heart hammering in his chest. Then, a voice, a whisper, soft, yet carrying the weight of something ancient. "She is not yours to take." His breath caught. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice shaking. The whisper came again, closer this time, wrapping around him like unseen tendrils. "She belongs to us. She was never meant to live among you. Every suitor who claims her pays the debt owed on her." Realization struck him like a blow. The spirits had claimed Inim as their own. Any man who tried to marry her was unknowingly offering himself as a sacrifice to settle the debt her parents had unknowingly incurred the day they took her from the Forbidden Grove. The disappearances, the whispers in the night, the way her beauty seemed almost unnatural, it all made sense now. Inem was never meant to marry. She was never meant to stay. Stumbling back to the village, his mind raced. Who could he tell? Would they believe him? He thought of confronting Inem, demanding answers, but when he saw her later that evening, her laughter soft, her hair catching the last golden light of the setting sun, his resolve faltered. She looked so human, so real. Yet, he knew now that she did not belong among them. That night, he sought out Adiz, his closest friend, the only person he trusted. As he revealed what he had learned, Adiz's face paled, her hands gripping his arm. "We have to tell the elders," she whispered. Obiora hesitated. "And what will they do? Cast her out? Harm her?" "You know what they would do," Adiz said, fear flickering in her eyes. "They will never let a spirit live among them." A deep dread settled in Obiora's stomach. He didn't want to believe it, but Adiz was right. The elders were bound by tradition. If they discovered that Inem was not truly one of them, they would do whatever was necessary to rid the village of her. And Obiora couldn't let that happen. That night, as the village slept, he made his way to Inim's home. She was sitting outside, watching the stars, as if she had been waiting for him. "You know, don't you?" she said softly, not turning as he approached. Obiora felt his breath catch. "You know that I know?" She nodded, still gazing at the sky. "I have always felt it, the pull, the whispers in the wind. But I ignored them. I wanted to stay. I wanted to be human." He knelt beside her, his voice breaking. "Then stay. We will protect you." At last, she turned to face him. Her eyes shimmered with sadness. "You can't protect me from what I am," she whispered. "I need to leave. If I stay, more people will pay the price. It has to end, Obiora." He wanted to argue, to tell her that she belonged there with them, with him. But before he could speak, a sudden gust of wind tore through the village, rattling rooftops, bending trees. The air grew thick, heavy with something unseen, something ancient. Obiora shivered as whispers rose on the wind, soft at first, then louder, rising like a chorus of voices carried by the night. "It is time." His blood ran cold. He looked around, but there was no one. Only the trees swaying violently. Inem stood, her face calm, resigned. "They're calling me," she said. He grabbed her hands. "No. You belong here." A single tear slipped down her cheek. "I never did." She leaned forward, pressing her forehead against his. "Goodbye, Obiora." Before he could stop her, she turned and began walking. He watched, helpless, as she made her way toward the Forbidden Grove, her white wrapper billowing like mist in the moonlight. A cry rose from the village as people woke to the howling wind, stepping out of their homes. "Is that not Inem?" someone called. But she did not turn back. By the time they rushed to stop her, she had already reached the entrance of the grove. Obiora fell to his knees as she stepped beyond the trees. The moment her feet touched the sacred ground, the wind ceased. The whispers faded. And then, silence. Inem was gone. 4 days, the village mourned. No one spoke her name. The elders, sensing something unnatural, forbade anyone from going near the grove. And no one dared to. But sometimes, on quiet nights, when the wind rustled through the trees, the villagers swore they could hear laughter, soft, distant, carried by the spirits themselves. As for Emeka, Ifani, and Chaik, they were never found. Their names became nothing more than whispers in the dark. And so, the people of Aku never spoke of Inem again. But each night, they shut their doors early, whispering prayers, afraid that one day, she might return. For what is taken by the spirits must one day be returned. And beauty, no matter how enchanting, can never escape fate.